J.Edgar Hoover, Part 4, Scene 12, Take 37. Action.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the History and Mystery channel. I'm your host, the Chronicler, and I want you to like and subscribe. Now that you've done that, I want to delve into the last part of our story. A story that told us how the first director of the FBI, J.Edgar Hoover, rose to power, abused his power, but also achieved some remarkable things. For example, the creation of the world's largest scientific crime detection lab, which is also known as the fingerprint database. He created the national blacklist, reorganized the training of agents, and made sure that criminals and foreign spies ended up behind bars. Today, we will find out how Hoover's story will end. Is it in glory, damnation, or still up to debate? Join us in the last 4 chapters of J.Edgar Hoover. Kennedy takes the presidential office. The surveillance of Martin Luther King. JFK's assassination. The end of Hoover's career and his death. Let's start with part 1. Now that we arrive in the 1960s, the era of the American royal family, the Kennedys, when JFK won the presidential elections of the 1960s, a period of hope came to the American populace. But for Hoover, it felt like the opposite. He saw himself as a gritty, no bullshit lawman who had a distaste for arrogant, upper-class Harvard graduates, which was a category in which JFK perfectly fits according to Hoover's point of view. During Hoover's career, he always found a way to bypass the Attorney General by either getting a direct line to the President or by having an Attorney General who would turn a blind eye to what he was doing. Just imagine how Hoover's face must have looked when he found out that JFK decided to bring his younger brother, Robert Kennedy, to the office as Attorney General. When JFK did this, he made sure that Hoover had no way to go around him. But let's not forget that Hoover would not have been called the #1 cop in America if he didn't have some aces up his sleeve. For a starter, Hoover kept a collection of secret files on all the members of the Kennedy family, and he even had some tabs on JFK. For example, Hoover knew about multiple extramarital affairs and other scandalous relationships from JFK, dating all the way back to World War II. During World War II, Kennedy was involved with a young Danish-American journalist named Inga Arvad, which doesn't sound so bad until you find out that she was a special guest of Adolf Hitler during the Summer Olympics of 1936, attended the wedding of Hermann Göring, and was accused of fraternizing with multiple suspected German agents during the war. JFK knew that Hoover knew many of his secrets, and he also knew that if he took on his brother as Attorney General, he had to make a plan to prevent a potential war with Hoover. For that reason, JFK made it clear that there were some things that would change under him, but there were also some things that wouldn't change. And the thing that wouldn't change would of course be Hoover's position as director of the FBI. This is what JFK would tell the press when he said that you don't fire God. When Hoover heard about this, he decided to repay the honor in a way that only a secret agent would. Hoover would make a cryptic memo, which he would send to the soon-to-be Secretary of State, Dean Rusk, and his Attorney General, Baron White. In this memo, Hoover wrote that the FBI had, and I quote, a careful planned program of counterattack against CP-USA. When you heard that, your reaction was probably the same like mine. That sounded vague. And what do you mean? Well, luckily enough, there were some smart people inside of Kennedy's inner circle, because they understood very well what Hoover meant and that he now made them complicit in an illegal wiretapping operation that was run by the FBI. Or better said, Hoover told Kennedy, if I'm coming under fire, I will make sure that the heat will not forget you. After hearing this, you might think, well, Kennedy could just tell his side of the story and be over with it. Well, unfortunately, Washington doesn't work like that. And when something becomes a he said, she said game, the political opposition will use it and weaponize it so that they can try to destroy JFK's political career. JFK and Hoover's relationship had a rusty start and would only get worse the longer they worked together. When JFK's brother, Bobby Kennedy, moved into the office of the Justice Department, he and Hoover had their first face-off. Bobby wanted the FBI to shift his focus from domestic intelligence to fighting against organized crime. Bobby would even categorize the mafia as a bigger problem for American society than Soviet infiltration. When Hoover heard this, he had to double check if he was awake, because that sounded like a nightmare to our good old communist hunter. Hoover despised every move that Bobby tried to make as Attorney General. When Bobby decided to go around Hoover and contact FBI agents on his own, it was enough for Hoover, and his ego couldn't take it. He wasn't gonna let some young Harvard graduate bypass him. Hoover would make his point known by sending Bobby monthly updates on all the gossip that he had gathered on him and his family. Some of these messages would include evidence of JFK's affair with a mistress named Judith Campbell. In his second message, Hoover would say that he knew about JFK's wild weekends on the West Coast that included Frank Sinatra and a bunch of sex workers. The message Hoover was trying to send was very clear. If you try to bypass me, I will destroy your family's career. Now that Bobby and JFK knew that Hoover had enough evidence to blackmail them and to destroy their careers, they still seemed to underestimate him and thought Hoover wouldn't care so much about political policy. But how were they wrong when Bobby and Jack decided to broaden their advocacy for civil rights? When they did that, Hoover saw a political administration that became a breeding ground for communist sympathizers and for Soviet espionage. Besides the Kennedys, there was another big name putting its mark on the 1960s, and that was a civil rights activist named Martin Luther King. A man who tried to change a nation for the better. At least, that's how I look at it. Our good old friend Hoover had a different opinion. He believed that communists used racial discontent to further their cause and that they were behind the civil rights movement. After hearing about Hoover's faults, I think we can already guess who he would see as his next enemy. Dr. Martin Luther King. Hoover would start his first campaign against him in the late 50s. During this campaign, he ordered his agents to tap King's phone and monitor the Southern Christian Leadership Conference of 1957. The FBI's surveillance of the conference became a slippery slope, and agents would even burglarize its offices. If you thought that move already went too far, then I have some bad news for you. The FBI would come back 20 more times, and every time they came, the message became more clear. The civil rights movement had to stop, or at least tone down their operations. Well, as you could expect, it had the opposite effect, and King's impact on the American society would only grow bigger during the 60s. Besides his impact on society, King would also manage to create an impact on American politics by getting into a close relationship with the Kennedy administration. Thanks to the close relationship, King even managed to get access to the White House, something that Hoover didn't have, and something that would enrage Hoover. But let's not forget that Hoover was running one of the best intelligence agencies in the world, and that he also had something that any US president would need, and that was surveillance intel. Hoover would choose to use this to his advantage and increase his surveillance of the civil rights movement. Hoover was desperately searching for anything that he could use to nail the movement to a cross. Besides looking for information, Hoover would also intervene and influence things that were happening in society. In this way, he could put the movement in a dark light. For example, Hoover intentionally prevented the FBI from stopping the Birmingham violence. He did this so that he could use it as a reason to gather more information on King. Hoover would even claim that the Freedom Riders were part of a larger conspiracy of groups that were following King's orders. Inside of the FBI, there was a lot of division about the situation. And this division only got more clear when we listened to a conversation between Roy Moore and a younger agent. During this conversation, Moore would say to the younger agent, "You're working for a crazy maniac, and that our duty is to find out what he wants and to create the world that he believes in." If you ask me, that sounds more like a delusional dictator than an FBI boss. But let's get back to the story. Hoover had his main target, MLK, in his sight. But MLK didn't do everything alone. He got supported by 3 advisors named Stanley Levison, Jack Odell, and Bayard Rustin. According to Hoover, these 3 men were nothing more than communist proxies, or better said, part of his mortal enemy. So naturally, Hoover decided to use intelligence as a tool to pressure Bobby Kennedy into approving an FBI-led investigation into Levison. During this investigation, he would wiretap Levison's office for 6 years straight, but couldn't find anything that could link Levison to the communists. Meanwhile, the work relationship between JFK and Hoover only became more rusty. And during the spring of 1962, JFK even admitted that he wanted to fire Hoover, but couldn't do it because Hoover had too much dirt on him. To say it better, it would mean the end of the political careers of the Kennedy brothers. During the summer, Hoover would continue his investigation into possible communist infiltrations of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Besides investigating, Hoover would also add King to his list of people that should be arrested and detained if a national emergency would occur. Luckily for Hoover, in June 1962, he found proof of Levison influencing King's political views and rhetoric. Thanks to this, Bobby shifted a little bit closer to Hoover and agreed that Levison's influence on King was growing, but it still wouldn't turn the Kennedys against King. And they would even advise King to distance himself from Levison and Odell during the lead-up to the March of Washington in 1963. Something that King wouldn't listen to. And of course, Hoover would use that mistake towards his advantage. Hoover would now claim that the event was communist-inspired, that he had to surveillance King's current address or any future address that King may move to. Bobby Kennedy wouldn't like that particular sentence because it would give Hoover unlimited surveillance capabilities as long as he could link an address to MLK. Because of that, Bobby rejected it. But that wouldn't mean the end of Hoover's surveillance on King. Luckily for the director, the Washington police wiretapped King's hotel room in the Willard Hotel, and they wouldn't mind sharing their intel with the FBI. Thanks to this intel, Hoover found out that King was visited by multiple women that weren't his wife, which is something that could easily destroy the good name of any man, and especially when that man is a religious reverend. Now that Hoover had this information, he would put all of Washington on high alert and ask his aide, William Sullivan, to write a memo that would claim that MLK was the most dangerous man for the future of America from the standpoint of communism. In October 1963, Hoover finally got his wiretapping request for King approved under the condition that it would be re-evaluated after 1 month. The precaution was largely for show, because the wiretapping of his house would remain in place until April 1965, and his office it would remain until June 1966. But I also think that Bobby had some other things on his mind during November 1966, because that's the year when JFK got shot and the start of our next chapter. On the 22nd of November 1963, JFK was visiting Dallas, Texas to seek support for new frontier policies, but he was also there to promote himself for the 1964 presidential elections. It was planned to be a day filled with festivities and speeches, but it ended with the start of a murder investigation into the assassination of the 35th President of the United States, JFK. May he rest in peace. At 12:30, JFK got shot to the back of his head by Lee Harvey Oswald. At least, that's what the official story tells us. If we were to believe the conspiracy theories, it would say that either Hoover or the CIA ordered his assassination. But that's a story for another day, so let's get back to the official one. Lee Harvey Oswald was already a known man by the FBI because of his earlier defection to the Soviet Union. When Oswald came back to the States, he naturally became a POI for the FBI, and they would task Agent James P. Hosty with spying on Oswald. This enraged Oswald, and when he entered the Bureau's office in Dallas, he told them that if they didn't stop, he would blow up the FBI or the police station of Dallas. This all got noted by the agents, but they wouldn't do anything with it. After the assassination of a president by Oswald, this known fact became quite problematic for the Bureau. To make it even more problematic, Special Agent James P. Hosty would admit to a Dallas police lieutenant that he knew Oswald was capable of assassinating a president, but never expected it to happen. When this news reached Hoover, he was furious. How was it possible that we knew but didn't do anything? With this in mind, Hoover had to move quickly, because these two mistakes could make the FBI look like they were culpable in JFK's assassination. Hoover would track down and destroy anything that could lead back to the FBI and make them look like the ones that slipped up. Because if that came out, Hoover would face the biggest scandal of his career, or better said, a disgraceful end of his career. Hoover's FBI was also responsible for checking Oswald's background and possible links to the Soviets. Another FBI department was responsible for the examination of the assassination, but these two departments would rarely communicate together, which would lead to a rushed and chaotic investigation. For example, the reason why Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald 2 days after the assassination wasn't even included. Now, former VP, but now President Lyndon B. Johnson had to lead a country that was looking for the truth and justice. Something that was difficult because Hoover's report was private for the public. To satisfy the masses, Lyndon B. Johnson started an independent investigation by the Warren Commission into the assassination of JFK. Hoover would of course try to influence them and guide them towards the same conclusion he made, which got easy because the Warren Commission had to use FBI investigators, and future President Gerald Ford was leaking information about the Commission towards Hoover the entire time. When the FBI's report reached the Commission, they would say, "This report leaves a million questions and is inconclusive." The committee wanted more information, but thanks to Gerald Ford's intel, Hoover was prepared and made sure his men kept their story straight during the hearings in May of 1964. During these hearings, Hoover would straight up lie and tell the committee that there was nothing up to the time of the assassination that gave any indication that this man was a dangerous character who might do harm to the president or vice president. James Host, who was speaking after Hoover, would say the exact same thing. Behind closed doors, members of the Warren Commission would say that they thought the FBI was hiding something from them, but that they couldn't prove it. Because of this, a year later, the Warren Commission ruled in line with Hoover's report, and Hoover saved his ass again. J.Edgar Hoover survived in the aftermath of the JFK assassination, but he would not take any risk. He was still fighting a war against the civil rights movement, who he thought were under the control of the communists. In this fight, 1964 became a really important year, because that's the year when President Lyndon B. Johnson would sign the Civil Rights Act into law. During the same year, Martin Luther King would win the Nobel Peace Prize. These were two major victory points for the movement, but the struggle wasn't over. Hoover still saw them as Soviet-influenced proxies and wouldn't back down. He also still had some aces up his sleeve. For example, he still had the recordings of MLK's room in the Willard Hotel. In these recordings, he had proof that King was visited by multiple women and did things he shouldn't have done as a married man. Hoover decided to weaponize these recordings and sent them to King's wife, Coretta, with a letter that would encourage King to take his own life, so that he could prevent these recordings from getting released to the public. On screen, I will show you the letter, and I encourage you to pause the video if you would like to read it. When we take a look at the autobiography of civil rights leader Andrew Young, we get an inside look on how Coretta and King reacted to this tape and the letter. About the tape, they said that it was of very poor quality and that there was no question in mind that this letter and the tape were coming from the FBI, because they knew that the FBI would have known about every wiretapping operation in the USA. King and Coretta would dismiss both the tape and what they called the sick letter. Hoover's stunt had failed, and he also knew that he couldn't release the tape, because if King, Coretta and Andrew Young could already put the dots together and point their fingers towards the FBI, then others could do the same. Which would mean that not only the tape could leave a trace towards the FBI, but also the letter, which would be a disaster for his reputation. The FBI, under the leadership of Hoover, would continue to follow and wiretap King until his assassination on the 4th of April 1968. May he rest in peace. After MLK's death, the civil rights movement wasn't over, but it did change with the creation of the Black Panther Party. The Black Panthers were a Marxist-Leninist Black Power organization that got founded by two college students named Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton. Unlike Martin Luther King, the Black Panthers did use violence to achieve their goals. J.Edgar Hoover even said in his fiscal report of 1969 that the increased activity of a violence-prone black extremist group had put more investigative responsibilities on the FBI. The Black Panthers also had a lot of influence on universities and school campuses. As a reaction to this, Hoover would compose an open letter to American students in September 1970. I will put the letter on display so that you can pause the video and read it. The Black Panthers' influence would continue to exist, and Hoover would continue his fight against them. The only difference is that Hoover was getting older and that his days were numbered. For example, if we just go back to January 1969, when President Nixon just took office, there was already a growing sentiment in Washington, D.C. that the aging director should retire. He was already 74 years old back then. But thanks to his friends and their power, he stayed director until his death on May 2nd, 1972. Hoover died in his Washington home from a heart attack. May he rest in peace. For better or worse, he ran the FBI and the BOI for 48 years and served 8 presidents. He changed the FBI into a high-tech professional crime-fighting organization, and during his lifetime, most Americans considered him a hero because of his creation of the G-Men and his determination to fight against what he saw as threats to the American society. But as we also learned during these episodes, that he wasn't always on the good side and abused his power many times. Like Harry S. Truman said, "We want no Gestapo or secret police. The FBI is standing in that direction. It was a long journey to complete this story, and I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I liked writing it. I want to thank you all for listening. See you in the next one. And remember, history is written in mystery.